What is up, everyone, and welcome back to Legends of the Dugout. I got a special guest with me today. He is a dealer at the National. He only deals in pre-war. So his name is Mike Pike, and I'm going to bring him on. But before I do, this is what I got from him last year, was this Christy Matheson white cap and this Carl Hubble. I can't even pronounce the back of it. But anyways, it's a Cuban card, and so I'm going to bring Mike on.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, Mike. Thank you for joining me in this special interview.
I'm honored. I really am.
I'm honored that you're having me, or having. Well, I'm honored for you acknowledging that to come onto my show.
And by the way, the Hubble is Propagandas Montiel.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to show a couple of those.
Oh, okay. You want to go ahead and show some right now?
No, let's just.
Okay. All right. So my first question to you is to tell the audience is to tell us about yourself and how you got into baseball cards.
Well, I'm a retired college English professor. And I've heard all the jokes about, English was my worst subject in college, blah, blah, blah. So you don't have to tell those jokes. When I retired, I decided that instead of doing all this research I had done before that was kind of boring, I'd start doing research on what I love, baseball. And I'd begun collecting baseball cards seriously when my son discovered baseball cards. And then later, a colleague of mine and a friend of mine who sets up with me at the National, Tim Newcomb, he put the hook deep into my mouth and started reeling me in on collecting vintage baseball cards. And that's how I got started. And then from there, I started giving talks. I wrote some articles because it's the history of baseball that fascinates me. And specifically, when I was an academic, I never wrote about the stuff everybody knows. I was always writing about the outlier stuff, the stuff that nobody knew. And so after, starting out collecting mainstream stuff like T206 and cards like that, I started collecting the oddball things like the Southern Leagues. And one thing led to another. And eventually my journey took me to African-American baseball, to the Negro Leagues, to Black Barnstorming, and that's where I am now. So in a nutshell, that's how I got here. And I should point out, too, that my dear friend Tim Newcomb and Chris Bland and I only set up at the National. We are not dealers per se. We don't have a high profile in the selling world. Occasionally we'll go on Net 54 and put some things up and try to sell them that way. But we go to the National once a year. And we set up a table, the three of us, and we sell cards so that we can feed our addiction of buying cards. So in a nutshell, that's how I got started. That's how I am a dealer.
Okay. Did you collect as a kid?
I didn't. I collected baseball cards on and off. I wasn't a big baseball fan as a kid. I would go to games, but I was more the sports I played were football, basketball, and track. And so I was more interested in those things than I was baseball. As a matter of fact, as a former track and field athlete, I always thought baseball players weren't really athletes. They didn't work out the way we did.
Okay.
You want to throw that little white ball around? Fine, throw it around. But there's a very famous quote from the English poet Tennyson, who says, in essence, that the child is the father of the man. And that's what really did it for me. When I had my son and he got older, we started collecting together. And now he can care less about baseball cards. And I'm deeply, deeply involved in that world.
Okay. So, hopefully you and I can stay connected and you can teach me a lot more about this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I remember when you bought that card, because you asked me about the Hubble, and I think I gave you my little 5-minute lecture on Cuban cards and what the Propagandas Montiel were all about. That's what I love doing. I love sharing what little knowledge I have so that other people can learn and maybe develop a passion for these things, because it is significant history. And particularly what amounts to kind of the minutia of some of the things that I collect. But more and more, the Negro Leagues and African-American baseball is becoming front and center, as it should, because in this country, we denied people who are Americans the opportunity to play at the same level that white Americans got to play. So all that's changed, thankfully.
Yes, definitely. So how long have you been a card dealer at the National, and then how many Nationals have you been to?
I think this is our 9th National. And gosh, I don't know. I've been probably at, 16, 17 Nationals. I just don't keep track of that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I can tell you what I bought, but,
so
I just don't keep track of those numbers.
So, I mean, of course, you went to the National before becoming a dealer there. So what clicked in your brain that made you decide that you wanted to become a dealer at the National? And how'd that process go to do that?
Yeah. Tim and I decided that, why can't we be on the other side of the table? Why can't we set up? And back in the day, 10 years or so ago, you could do that fairly easily. Now, there's a waiting list for people trying to get in the National. So we just threw our hat in the ring. We got a table, we set up. And then I think the next year, Chris came in with us. So we've been a team ever since.
Okay.
We call ourselves LUTFA, LUTFA Vintage Cards. And I won't tell you the story behind LUTFA, except other than to say it's a Scandinavian word for collectibles.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you about that. I didn't know where that came from.
I'll give you the real story in Cleveland.
Okay. You bet. So what are some items that you will be bringing to the National?
Well, you've said that, could this be the most expensive set for sale at the National? I don't know, but it could be. But the premier item I'm bringing this year is a complete set of Ramleys, T204.
Such a beautiful card.
Yeah, and the Ramleys consists of 121 cards. Ramley was produced in 1909. It was produced by a company called Morton. Turkish tobacco, if you look on the back, if you've ever seen a Ramley card, they highlight that it's Turkish cigarettes. Turkish tobacco was extremely popular in the early 20th century. Okay. And so the Morton company, there was a company called Ramleh, R-A-M-L-E-H, which manufactured cigarettes. And so had a fairly big presence. So the Morton decided, well, we want to get in this game. We want to produce cards that'll help sell our cigarettes. So they came up with the name Ramleh. They instead of having the R-A-M-L-E-H-Y or Y, they just dropped the E-H and added a Y.
Okay.
The interesting thing about that is that they were so successful, Ramley was so successful at first, that the old Ramleh company changed their name, and they just reversed their name and became known as Helmar. And Helmar cards are known to many advanced collectors. So the Morton Company creates Ramley cigarettes, and these cards were available in packs of cigarettes. As I said, there's 121 cards. The key card is the one I'm holding. That's Walter Johnson. Most people believe that this is his rookie card. And it's an extremely valuable card. This one is an SGC 2. It would probably be higher, except for this little tiny fleck of Paper Loss by Walter's Collar there. I don't know if you can see that.
I'll bring you solo again.
Yeah, if you see it, there's a little tiny piece right there.
Yep, I see it.
Otherwise, it would be a much higher grade, and I probably couldn't have afforded it.
Okay.
So that's the key card in the set. Another key card is Jesse Burkett. Jesse Burkett, Hall of Famer, does not have many cards. He too, his is a very difficult card in the set. This is mine. It's a PSA 1. And then it's filled with Hall of Famers like Eddie Plank. And Eddie Plank, there we go. That's a little less glare. The Eddie Plank card is an extremely highly sought card in the set. I can't tell you the number of times I've had people offer me privately just to buy the Plank card. And I say, well, that's a lot of money, but how am I going to get a new one? I could sell my house for a lot of money, but then what are my wife and I going to afford? So the Plank card is another tough one. There are a lot of Hall of Famers. There are obvious Hall of Famers who aren't in this set. There's no Ty Cobb. There's no Cy Young. There's no Tris Speaker. And what's interesting about the fact there's no Tris Speaker is the fact that the Morton Company was based in Boston. So in the set, the Boston American League players and the New York American League players are very highly sought, and they're tough to find. Here, for example, you have Tinker to Evers to Chance. I don't know if you can see those.
Yeah, I can see those.
Yeah. Here's Chance. Here's Evers. And here's poor old Joe Tinker with his pompadour hair. So those Hall of Famers are in there. But as I said, a number of significant Hall of Famers aren't in there. Ty Cobb, as I said, Cy Young, what's his name? Wagner. Those people aren't in there. But there are a number of Hall of Famers in there. Another difficult card in the set is Barney Pelty. And this is a very high-grade version of Barney. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a PSA 5. I've also had some major offers on this one.
Okay. Yeah, this is such a unique design on the card.
Oh, yeah, the cards are very uniquely designed. Now, I should point out, too, that the typical back is like this. It says Ramley. And I didn't bring a TTT but to show. I probably should have. But there's also a back. Pardon me. Morton made another cigarette called TTT. And they used the same design for the Ramleys, only on the back it says TTT. They're very scarce.
Okay.
And then there's a third variation on the set. And that's, if you notice, for example, here's Harry Niles. This is another high grade PSA 5. You notice on the back. Okay. But all of the cards have an oval frame showing the player.
Yes.
There were 6 players manufactured that have square frames. So then instead of having an oval frame here, it would be a square frame with a little border around it and a blank back. Pardon me. Those cards are exceedingly scarce. In all the years that I collected Ramleys, I never bought one. I had a couple opportunities, but it was just way too much money. This is Wildfire Schulte, one of my favorite players from the Cubs. Also in a PSA 5. And you can notice that, if I go back to Burkett in terms of the condition, you can see how condition really varies in these cards.
Oh, yeah.
A 5 is a whole lot nicer than a 1. But that's,
but for that age, it's still beautiful.
Oh, it is. Yeah. And finally, here's Mordecai Brown, or my Mordecai Brown. There's an interesting story on this one. Now, Mordecai looks like he ought to be a 5 or a 4 minimally, but he's a 1. He's a 10, what we now call 1. He's a 1 because on the back you have, and you probably can't see that,
the stamps.
Yeah, the stamp there is called Toy Town. Now, Toy Town was a kit you could buy, and you could create your own stamped images. And a lot of kids had Toy Town kits, and some of them would stamp the Toy Town logo on the back of their cards. Whoops. Can't take this one. Would stamp the Toy Town logo on the back of their cards. Why? I don't know. But they did. And there are a number of T204s that have the Toy Town stamp on them. And my Brown is one of them. I'm not a big stickler on backs. I much prefer looking at the fronts. And the front on the Brown is great. It's just that it got dinged because it had the Toy Town stamp on the back. So those are the T204s that I'm going to have with me.
With that Mordecai, if it didn't have the stamps, what do you think that grade would have been?
Oh, minimally a 4.
Okay.
Yeah, minimally. And it would have been a whole lot more than what it cost me.
Okay.
I got it in a trade plus a little cash with another dealer.
Okay. What else are you bringing?
Well, I've got many more.
All right. Well,
I've decided that it's time I move on from Old Judge. So I'm bringing the balance of my old judges. This is Ed Delahanty.
Okay.
This is probably his most famous pose. Delahanty was, and this got a 1 because you can see it's got album removal on the back.
Yep.
Without that album removal, you're looking at a 3 or a 4.
Okay.
Which again would have made it prohibitively expensive. I don't know if you know the story of Ed Delahanty. He was the guy who left the train when the team was traveling, and he decided to leave the train at Niagara Falls. And in his drunken stupor, he fell off the bridge, fell into the water, and the next day they started discovering his body parts because he was swept over the falls and dismembered. Sad, sad story. But Ed Delahanty was the first great superstar in baseball. He batted over 400 a couple of times. He was a terrific hitter, mediocre fielder, but he was a huge, huge name. But he had a terrible drinking habit, and that led to his somewhat early demise. There are very few cards of Ed Delahanty. And in Old Judge, I think there are 5 different poses in Old Judge. Another one I'm going to bring with me is Mike King Kelly, the famous catcher.
Man. Yeah, the $10,000 man.
The $10,000 man. You've done your research, Dave. I've decided it's time for somebody else to own Mike.
I would love to own Mike. I am in the, I guess you would say, the business of owning an Old Judge card this year. It's on my list that I don't want to leave the National without owning a Old Judge. So
come to our table because I'm going to have. I've only got 4 Hall of Famers remaining, and then I'm going to have 39 other graded comments.
Okay.
Some of which are really unique. So I think we can hook you up, Dave.
Okay.
I think you can come home from the National with an Old Judge.
And you can have my money.
And I can take your money just like I did last summer, Dave.
Yep.
It's transaction.
Yeah, because last year my thing was I didn't want to leave the National without a turkey red. and I got one. Here, I'll solo myself on this one. So I got
yeah.
This one. I mean, it has like the pinhole right there.
Yep.
Stuff, and then don't pay attention to the price, but it also has the writing in the back.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know, that beautiful handwriting from back in the day.
Cut into its value.
Yeah, I want to get a add back turkey red.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're really lucky, you'll get a blank back.
I didn't even know there was a blank back one.
Oh yeah. The very first set I assembled was a complete set of turkey reds, including there are a number of variations on the baseball side. I didn't do the boxers. I just stuck with the baseball. But yeah, I had a complete set of those. And pardon me, I just haven't talked much today, and I've got allergies.
Sorry, if you need to take a drink, take a drink.
Oh yeah, I shall. I have been. Another couple of cards I'm going to bring with me. You've already shown, and I've got a few Propagandas Montiel. This is Christy Mathewson. I'm going to bring him with me. And the interesting thing about these cards, I'll try to hold it up here. Can you see the hole in the upper, I guess it would be right-hand corner right here?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay. A lot of cards in Cuba, there you can see it against
the light.
The blinds, yeah. A lot of cards in Cuba were subjected to bugs because Cuba, as you know, is a very hot, temperate climate, and bugs abound. So oftentimes you'll see cards that came out of Cuba, particularly cards that have photographic paper, that have bug holes in them. And I can show you some of those from my own collection. I'm also bringing Jimmy Fox.
Solo you up there. Oh man,
That's
another beautiful. So is that Mathewson. You probably got a Bob Feller too. You're probably bringing and selling.
Sold it last year.
Okay.
I had a bunch of. I'm just, these are cards I've decided not to keep.
Okay.
I'm going to have a handful of T206 Southern Leaguers, but the two key ones I'm bringing, here's Hub Purdue. This one has a Hindu back, and they're pretty scarce.
Is this the one that we talked on the phone about the other day?
I possibly, yeah, I don't know. I can't recall, but
okay.
I have a number of these are duplicates from my own set. The only T206 I collect right now are Southern League.
Okay.
I think there were 28 Hindu backs. And as
What's
you can
the
see
name on the jersey on that one.
Oh, this is Bernhard. Bill
Okay.
Bernhard. He's from Nashville.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
I
I
have
see the Bill part on there. I didn't know what the rest of it was.
Yeah. I started out collecting baseball cards because I was collecting postcards at the time. And my friend Tim convinced me, you really need to switch to baseball cards, give up those postcards. So, I did. And so I'm also going to bring some postcards, including this one, which I think a friend of yours might be interested in. It's the Detroit team picture from 1907, and it's got Ty Cobb in it. Ty he's sitting there in the middle, growling at the camera.
And that's the H&M Taylor?
That's an H&M, right? H&M Taylor. But what's cool about this one is that it's got a written back, and you've still got the Ben Franklin stamp on it, which might appeal to some folks. Another thing I'm bringing, one of the sets that I collect is called Kalamazoo bats, and they're known in the trade as K-bats. And they're a very interesting set.
Okay.
they picture players from 1887, usually and primarily Philadelphia Athletic players, in a stadium setting. For example, this is Ed Andrews. This is my favorite card from the set. This card I'm not bringing with me.
Okay.
It's staying in my set. But the thing I like about this is that it shows Ed Andrews in his shirt and pants, and if you can see it, his suspenders are hanging down around his butt.
Yep.
And I just always thought this is the way ball was played.
So is this like a rare or scarce set?
It's pretty scarce. Yeah.
Okay.
But the card I'm bringing with me is this one, Robinson and Mann. It's one of the few duo cards. The guy with his hands on his knees. The catcher is Robinson, who's in the Hall of Fame. This one will probably have a significant price on it.
Okay. What's the back look like?
The back is blank.
Okay.
And it was taken out of an album. The back on the Andrews gives you information about the series.
Okay.
Excuse me, I don't know who's calling, but I hope my wife takes it.
It's all right.
I'll try to mute it. Another card I'm bringing with me is a kind of interesting card. This is called an H8017. And it's in the trade, it's known as an old mill cabinet. Now, when you think of old mill cards, you generally think of something like this. Oops. This is the typically sized old mill card.
Let me bring you out. There you go. Yep.
They're small. But these are cabinet cards, and they're very scarce. We're not sure how they were acquired, apart from you had to have coupons, is kind of the general sense of it. You'd send them off to Old Mill, and then they would send you this cabinet card. And on the back, it says Old Mill cabinets. I've got a number of these, and I've decided that it's time to let Walters go back out into somebody else's collection.
Okay.
So I'll have that with me too. And then, I'm just going to have a number of vintage things. I'll have a few photographs, a lot more postcards. Oh, another thing that I'm bringing with me, and this is kind of a good segue into talking about what I collect, if you want me to.
Okay.
I'm bringing a complete set of the 1948 Cleveland Indians, what they called the photo pack or the picture pack. And that's highlighted by this guy.
Oh, I love that.
It is a fabulous photo. Although I have to say the 49 picture pack that the Indians distributed shows Satchel pitching. But this
one, yeah.
This one's the classic pose that was on his rookie card. And also, as part of that set, is Larry Doby.
Oh, man. Yeah, he was born right here in Camden, South Carolina, a couple towns over from me.
Yep. And Hank Greenberg's in that set. There's your Bob Feller. Bob Feller's in the set. Bob Lemon is in the set. There's Bob Lemon. So I'm going to have that with me as well. These are all.
So you're selling all of those, or you're just bringing the satchel with you?
No, I'm selling it as a complete set.
Okay.
Satchel will be there as part of the set.
Okay.
But this is a duplicate satchel. I'm keeping the good one.
Okay.
For my own collection. So that's a good. Now, I don't know how much longer you want me to talk, Dave. How are we doing for time?
Oh, we're almost at 30 minutes, but it's okay because I got some more questions for you.
Oh, okay. You want me to shut up for a minute and you can ask the question?
I feel like I have to have you come back on and we can talk more and stuff too. But let's go on with the questions here. How do you feel the hobby is going currently?
Well, that's a loaded question. I mean, it depends on, I don't know. I think the hobby right now is very strong. There was a little lull after 2021. When the national didn't happen in 2020, so nobody set up. 2021, we literally had people throwing money at us. It was just incredible. Because I sold, for example, I disassembled my last complete T206 set minus the big four. And there were some very high grade cards in there, and people were just buying them like crazy. I think that's kind of dropped off a little bit. What's the future of the hobby? I think vintage is always going to command interest. I think what's happening is that a lot of people are realizing that a lot of the, I think of Panini, for example. I don't even think they're in business anymore, but a lot of what I call the created rarities, like a 1 of 1 or a 1 of 5 of stars who may or may not make it over the long haul. I think those have begun to fall off in value tremendously. But as people collect things like that, then they slowly start going back further. They start peeling away the onion and discovering some of the history, not only of cards, but more importantly, of baseball. So then when you start getting back to the 50s, 40s, 30s, 20s, and then back to the teens and the aughts, that's when you begin discovering cards like T206s, T210s, T211, T204. You start discovering postcards. I mean, you start discovering the history. It begins to unfold. And I think that's what's important about cards. It teaches us the history of the game if we pay attention to it and if we're curious about it. I get a card like this. This is a very rare card. This was issued in 1932. It's called a double aguila. It's a Caribbean card.
Okay.
In this case, it shows Martin Deigo in a game. Now, what's really important about this is that it shows Martin Deigo wearing, you can't see it. I mean, you're not going to be able to, you're going to have to believe me when I tell you.
Okay.
Martin Deigo is wearing a Hilldale jersey. Hilldale was one of the powerhouses in the early Negro leagues. And Deigo played for Hilldale. The story goes that when he came back to play in this league, he didn't have any uniforms, so he had one of his old Hilldale jerseys with him, and he put it on and wore it for this game when this picture was taken. It's one of I think 4 cards that exist that show an actual Negro League team name. Because as you know, the Negro Leagues had no cards. Nobody was producing cards for the Negro League. So one of the ways that we can collect cards and learn more about the Negro League stars is by collecting their Cuban, their Venezuelan, their Puerto Rican, their Mexican cards. Because in those countries, they produce cards. And it didn't make any difference if you were Jimmy Fox, Martin Deigo, or I don't know, Willard Brown. You would have a card. And some of these guys ended up in the Hall of Fame. And Deigo's in the Hall of Fame. Here's, this is a pretty scarce card.
Because ain't he in like 5 different Hall of Fames?
Yes, he is. Yeah. This is his Propagandas Montiel. You may recognize that border, Dave.
I do.
So Negro League players, both Cuban and American, are not given any any person of color who played baseball until 1947 doesn't have a card in the United States, with one glaring exception. And that one exception, and he's in here somewhere.
While you're looking, that card that you showed me of him playing, is that staying in your collection, or are you bringing that for sale?
No, these from here on out, cards I'm showing you, they're in my collection.
Okay.
I mean, I bought that card from a friend of mine, and he said, I'm selling it to you. If you ever decide to sell it, I get the first shot at buying it back. So,
okay.
But no, that's staying in my collection. There was only one card issued until 1948 that showed a player of color. Only one card issued in the United States that showed a player of color. And that was in 1916 when the Z-Nut Company in California issued this card of Jimmy Claxton. Now, there's a really interesting story behind this card. And by the way, this card is extremely scarce. Claxton was a journeyman pitcher from, I believe, either Canada or Washington State. This is a picture of Claxton playing for the Oakland Oaks. Yes, for the Oakland Oaks. You can't see it. The Oaks were hurting for pitching. And a friend of Claxton said, I have a friend who, he's got darker skin, but he's an American Indian. He's not a bad pitcher. Maybe you want to sign him. So they did. They figured, okay, we'll give him a shot. Terrible pitcher. First game he pitched, they just lit him up. And then the second game of the doubleheader, they brought him in as a reliever, lit him up again. Next day, I think he pitched again in relief, lit him up. But before he pitched, the photographer taking the photographs of the Oakland Oaks team came around and took photographs of each of the players so that they could appear on the annual Z-Nut card. So by a sheer stroke of luck, Jimmy Claxton has his photo taken. He's put on a card. They later find out the guy who suggested that he be picked up and put in the rotation and said he's an American Indian said, no, he's black. He's African American. They cut him loose. But his card remained. So that is the only card issued in America during that period of Jim Crow baseball, of African Americans not being allowed to play baseball. It's the only card a player of color.
Okay.
So I'm sorry.
No, it's good. No. I love listening to this. It's fine.
You had other questions? Ask.
Yep. So how was your experience last year at the National, and how do you feel this year will go for you?
Last year was normal. But the one thing that I really objected to is that so many dealers were placed behind corporate displays, and we were one of them. Mm-hmm. It was almost as if we'd been banished because we had this big barrier in front of us and people couldn't find us. That was due to the previous owners of the National, who were not people of, let's say, any real deep values. They simply wanted the money. And they didn't care about the little dealer like us. The big corporate folks, they pay the big bills. And I'm told this year that's going to change. So my expectation for this year, is much higher than it was last year. We hated our location, and everybody back there with us hated it as well. And we all complained bitterly. And we're hopeful that, they listened and we won't have that experience again. Insofar as the turnout, that's always a crapshoot.
Yeah, because I didn't even know there's like tables behind that area until I started walking around, and I stumbled upon that and found you back there.
Yeah. We were basically hidden.
Yeah, and then looking at the floor plan for this year, it seems like they got the corporate areas like off to like one side, all bundled together, right. And I think PSA is on its own little area up against the wall, but all the dealers are out and stuff. And then the one thing I didn't care for was walking through the Breakers Pavilion to get to another side. So right. I think they got that, back by the Autograph Pavilion this year.
Right.
In the map.
Right.
And then I see that they have the floor plan already laid out for the Chicago next year.
I haven't.
The Breakers Pavilion is not in that area where it was before. It's off to a different side where dealers were at. So,
yeah, I don't know. I don't know how they're going to do the corporate stuff next year back in Chicago. I sure as the heck don't hope it's not like what it's been in the past. Do you remember what the corporate section looked like?
Last year's national?
No. 2025.
2025. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know they have it already on the website already on there. I thought it was kind of interesting to see that. So I know the dealer list ain't out yet for next year because nobody's gone through their raffle yet.
No. So, yeah, you got to go through a process, and the people with more years of service get the better tables.
Yeah. And since you've been doing it for, 10 years now.
Well, I think we're technically in group number 9.
Okay.
But, there are a lot of other people in there with us. And there are a lot of people ahead of us. So.
Okay. So I know, you're going to be located at booth 3712 and 3714 out there. So if anybody wants to go by and talk to Mike or check out his stuff, they can, because, Tim and Chris.
Yeah. We decided
them last year.
Yeah. We decided this year to get 2 booths because Chris is branching out more into photography. So he's going to have, in essence, a single booth pretty much devoted to photography.
Okay.
He's going to have a lot of stuff.
Okay. And Tim, you and Tim are, sharing that area?
Well, Chris, Tim, and I will share a booth where we have nothing but baseball cards.
Okay.
But then Chris is going to have an adjacent booth devoted to photography.
Okay.
And just Chris and I are pretty much pre-war. I'm going to have a couple of more modern cards only as backup because they're duplicates. But we're all kind of pretty much specialized pre-World War II.
Okay. So do you have any tips for buyers at the show as to, because it's, they're always the thing of how would you ask, a dealer, what's your bottom, dealers don't want to hear what's your bottom, it's my bottom's right there already marked on the thing. It's, you guys want to hear what I want to offer you. And then that's the negotiating process. But is there any other tips that you would give, the consumer coming in there and looking for cards?
Well, 2 to start with.
Okay.
1, and I learned this lesson because of experiencing it myself. at the first 2 nationals I attended. And that is, if you see a card that you really want, and that's a reasonably obscure card, no matter the condition, buy it. Because if you don't, I guarantee you it'll probably be gone when you return. So that's the first thing I learned. Second thing I learned is that if you're collecting fairly obscure cards, for example, Propagandas Montiel or Caramello, any Cuban issue, if you're collecting any of those, don't worry about condition. If you see one, grab it. You can always try and upgrade it later. I showed you some of the cards in my collection are in pretty bad condition, but because they're so scarce, you don't always see them again offered. But
yeah, 'cause I think with those, I think they usually get graded like a 1, maybe a 2.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's because of the Cuban climate and the way in which they were stored, and
then how thin they are,
and the thinness of them, etc. But when it comes to negotiating, don't try to offend anybody. I'm not easily offended, but if somebody comes in and is kind of unreasonable, then I'm not going to give a discount at all. But if you're reasonable about it, yeah, I have a number. I have a bottom number. But it's usually not more than about 5%, maybe 8% of the price you see.
Okay.
I try to be very fair when I price my cards. I go to the standard places to look to see what that particular card might sell for. And just to give you an example, I haven't bought an old Judge in probably a decade. So I've got all these old Judges I'm going to sell. I don't know what they sell for now. So I'm trying to determine that. I try to do the research.
Okay.
So I think if you try to be reasonable with the dealer, they'll be reasonable with you.
Okay. Yeah. So,
but the other thing I should add is that, we don't, when you set up at the National, it's not free.
No. That was the other thing I was going to ask you too, because I've heard, rumors that before, like, dealers had like so many like passes that they had for them and their workers, but now they're limited to so many, and if they need extras, they got to buy the VIP pass and stuff now.
Every booth is given 2 passes, 2 dealer passes, and then you have the option of buying 2 additional passes for other people in your booth.
Okay.
So in our case, we have 4 passes because we have 2 booths, and then we have the option of buying 2 additional passes. That's it. In the past, you could buy more. You could buy more additional passes, so that people were coming in who weren't dealers. They were just getting there early and, able to cruise the room and hopefully buy stuff. But that's all changed. Yeah.
Yeah. Never had that privilege of getting in, prior to. So, and I know I never will. So I'll wait till everybody comes in Wednesday.
Yeah. I mean, trust me, I've stood in lines waiting for the doors to open. So I know what it is. I know what it's all about. Unless we, invite you to work at our booth, and then you'll get a pass. But we have 6 people who work, and we're all, everybody works.
Yeah.
If you're out on the floor, you got to have somebody there covering for you.
Exactly.
Because, we're always looking for things for not only for our own collections, but also things that we might want to resell.
Okay. So here's a question. As working the National, like, what is the craziest thing that's walked up to your table that somebody's tried to sell you?
Well, it's hard to pick one thing.
Okay.
But a couple times, people have walked up with exceedingly scarce cards. I remember one year, a guy came up and he had all 4 tie cops in T206, and they were ungraded. They were clearly, minimally 4s and 5s. And he said, I don't know what these really are worth. You're the first one I've shown them to. And I said, they're worth a lot of money. And I said, this is what I give you for them. But before you do that, talk to some other dealers and see what they'll give them to you, what you might get from them. And I gave him my card, and he waltzed away, never saw him again. I mean, he probably either sold them to another dealer or gave them to an auction. But I don't know. There's just been, you get all kinds of things that come up to the table, some of which we have no interest in at all. Other things that people are asking way more money than they're worth. We generally go on the basis of, we work with about a 30% margin. So if somebody offers me a card for $100, I'll pay you 70. And then I might list that card for 90. So somewhere, in that area.
Okay.
It just, again, it depends on the card. And some cards, I can tell you right now, this T204 set, not going to be a whole lot of room for negotiating on that, because I have a number in mind, and it's a high 6-figure number. I guarantee you there will not be another complete set of T204 in that room.
Probably not.
And I'll probably bring another card or two that I'll put in the case. Then I'm not really crazy about selling, but if somebody wants to pay me what I tell them I want, then they got a card.
Okay. So I'm going to wrap this up. If you want to stay on shortly after, we can chat just real quick. And
Sure.
Then, yeah. All right. So again, go visit Mike at booth 3712 and 3714. He'll be there all week. Go check out his table. You will not be disappointed dealing with Mike. I was not. He was, like I told him, like a dealer that stood out to me from last year's national. So, and that has to say a lot with me dealing with the other dealers at that show. So thank you again, Mike, for coming on. And I hope we can do this again. Not just talk about the national, but just talking cards and the history of baseball.
Yeah, talk about collections. That's
Collections.
more
Yeah.
fun.
And so I already have another idea for another conversation that I want to bring in somebody else to have a conversation with you also. I think will be fun. So
Dave, let me just say thank you for asking me on.
Well, it was an honor. You saying yes. Thank you. So I'll wrap this up, and I'll see you all at the next game.